Greetings, comrades. The Zimbabwe community in South Africa decided not to approach the courts when the Zimbabwe exemption permit was terminated. The reasons being that from the onset, which we have outlined in this YouTube channel, the documentation of Zimbabweans who do not qualify for mainstream visas has been a negotiated process. The first process, of course, we were not involved ourselves, and some of us were not here when the South African government, under the President Nelson Mandela administration, granted people from the SADC region what we now call the Mandela ID. There are some, of course, who never benefited from that process, but it was open to everyone who was in South Africa. In 2002, when Zimbabweans were fleeing political violence, we negotiated with the government because at the time, government was saying there was no war in Zimbabwe to grant people asylum documents. But later on in May 2002, they were granted. We have dealt with this question extensively in this YouTube channel. From there, we realized that a number of people, or thousands of them, who were not necessarily political victims, but economic migrants, took up the asylum document because it provided them with an opportunity to study, to conduct business, and to work. But every holiday, they would be going back to Zimbabwe in violation of that very Section 22 document. We negotiated again with government and raised these issues to say, while we understand that the South African state has an obligation to arrest anyone who violates the immigration laws, in terms of detaining them at Lindela, deporting them back to Zimbabwe, and of course to other countries. We raised these issues that in our view, it was costly, unsustainable, because you deport a person in Beitbridge, when the truck that deported the person arrives in Johannesburg, and the person will also be in Johannesburg. So we had to negotiate with the political actors in South Africa, including government. We had meetings with the Portfolio Committee on Home Affairs prior to the granting of the special permits that we needed the South African government to consider a special arrangement for Zimbabweans. That was then agreed, hence there was the rollout of the special permits. So from the onset, we've always been negotiating. So when in 2021, government reached a decision not to extend, but to terminate the Zimbabwe exemption permit, of course, we're aggrieved. But we said South Africa is a sovereign state. We cannot seek to co-govern with the South Africans. It is their country. If a government makes a decision, ours is either to appeal to them to change the decision or to accept the decision, as opposed to trying to force the government to go against what it has already decided. And we said we respect those that decided to go to court, and we said if the outcome is in favor of ZEP holders, certainly ZEP holders are going to celebrate. And we raised the issue that as the Zimbabwe community in South Africa, we do not only represent the 178,000 people. There are other negotiations that we are involved with the South African government on other matters. So if we then, on this one, we go to court, it then blocks other negotiations that we have with the South African government, which at this point we cannot put in the public domain. Because the moment you go to court, you are closing the door for other negotiations that you are engaged with. Because it is not only ZEP holders that we represent people of different interests that are from Zimbabwe. And indeed, we said this is a political thing. the Zimbabwe exemption permit, while of course people have gone to court, the court has expressed itself, but it remains political. So let me read one letter which demonstrate that this is political, and we will also listen to the brief interview by the second Deputy Secretary General of the African National Congress, Comrade Nomvula Mokonyane. I will not comment on the interview that she did. I just want us to appreciate that going forward, because in the previous video we said we are entering the election season in South Africa, and we saw in 2021 that the issue of migration was at the center of the election messaging, and it is going to be the same as we go to 2024. We did a study in Europe, some right-wing formations that rose through the issue of migration. It's a serious issue, the question of migration globally. You know how Donald Trump came into power on the question of migration, and how he wanted to build a wall between the United States and Mexico. We saw how the Germans responded to the question of migration, and we see other European countries, their response to migration, and also how the United Kingdom then seeks to send migrants or refugee seekers or migrant asylum seekers to Rwanda, which of course the courts have thrown that out. But let's read this letter. It's a it's a letter to the editor. It's written to the Star newspaper. It's Wednesday, July 5, 2023. I will read the letter. It says, "Write that Motsolet appeals ZEP judgment." The writer says, Home Affairs Minister Dr. Aaron Motsolet is correct to appeal the judgment by the Gauteng High Court, which found his prerogative to terminate the Zimbabwe exemption permit ZEP invalid, unlawful, and unconstitutional. The court presupposes that there is a need for consultation whenever the government elects to control an influx of undesirable persons. In this case, the government proactively regularized undocumented Zimbabweans and offered them temporary stay, with a dispensation to explore other immigration options available at their disposal. Put simply, the ZEP provides its holder a status to sojourn the country for a stipulated period. That's why a holder will be guilty of an offense if the permit has expired. The question of consultation doesn't arise. Likewise, an expectation of citizenship or an equivalent option by a holder is mischievous and illegitimate. How can people who fled their country feel entitled to demand conditions of stay from a host country outside the act of goodwill extended to them? It's an entitlement mentality of an ungrateful bunch. The reality is that there are a few ZEP holders against a multitude of illegal migrant workers and hawkers, suffocating the economy and public health care. The status quo will have had long-term consequences for citizens. Yet, an aloof judiciary arrogated to itself some power to govern the country through unintelligible judgments. That's a recipe for state paralysis, written by Morgan Patla, is in Ekhuruleni. We will, over the weekend, when we, as part of our political education Red Sunday, analyze this question, the migration question, from a Marxist perspective. What does it mean? Lenin says workers have no country. So what does this mean? I know that comrades in COSATU, possible SACP, and of course ANC, as will play the interview by the second deputy, I'm not sure, first deputy secretary general, my apologies, first deputy secretary general of the ANC, Comrade Nomvula. they have views on the question of migration. But we want to subject this to scientific analysis. What our position as internationalists. So we need to at least critique or analyze this from a class analysis, the issue of migration into South Africa, and the impact that it has when people then in poor communities start fighting each other, when it then used as a political ball. So while comrades, I was still recording, then the lights went out. So I was saying we will indeed, as part of our Red Sunday, discuss from a Marxist perspective this question of migration. As I said, workers have no country. What does this mean? But let's listen to the first Deputy Secretary General of the ANC on what the African National Congress thinks. The first Deputy Secretary General raises key issues. The Freedom Charter says South Africa belongs to all who live in it. She argues that the ANC and South Africans in general were a bit naive because she argues that the conditions are no longer the same as they were then, and that this must change, that South Africa does not belong to all who live in it. She did not clarify whether those who live in it legally or even undocumented. So let's listen to what she says.
ANC is calling for a change to the ethos that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. It says it supports Home Affairs' decision to end Zimbabwean exemption permits, or ZEPs. You might know the acronym better. The minister is appealing a court order declaring the termination of those permits unlawful and unconstitutional. The governing party is also calling for tougher bylaws and tighter border controls. While the ANC First Deputy Secretary, Nomvula Mokonyane, was speaking to JJ Tabane on Power to Truth.
The issue related to our borders and
migration,
stuff.
Yeah.
Migration. We support Comrade Aaron Motsoaledi,
yeah,
even on his position to go and appeal the decision of the court about the ZEP issues related to Zimbabweans, because we are partly correcting that, because I think we were a bit naive opening up and believing that South Africa belongs to all those who live in it, and that we were all together in those difficult times.
So you think we must change that stance? It's
not working for South Africans, nor is it working for the very neighboring countries. We have a challenge as we speak now, dealing with illegal mining.
Yeah.
We have a problem now with the drugs in our townships, not only in the township, not only in Hillbrow, even in a village, in the far-flung villages. We are facing those kind of issues. We have a number of suspects who get arrested, but because they are not documented and they are not in the system.
So you think the ANC must change on migration?
We must change drastically.